Hi, and welcome to That's Ready Mysterious. Join me for an intriguing look into real-life mysteries. Who was the mad gasser of Mattoon? What was whaling at the Wilga waterhole? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts and references for all episodes can be found at that'sreadymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about Agent 355. Corey Ford wrote in his 1965 book, A Peculiar Service, a narrative of espionage in and around New York during the American Revolution. I like to picture 355 as the opposite of the reserved and sober young Townsend, small, pert, vivacious, clever enough to outwit the enemy, but feminine enough to give Townsend a brief interlude of happiness that he would never know again. Who was Agent 355? Agent 355 was an unknown woman who spied for George Washington during the American Revolution. Some historians don't believe she existed, while others believe that she changed the outcome of the Revolutionary War. George Washington knew the importance of getting information about the enemy, so he created a top-secret spy network that created codes, sent messages in invisible ink, and even sometimes sent messages using laundry. They went behind enemy lines to gather information. Women were frequently used as spies because they had access to information men didn't, given their roles in the community. Anna Strong, for example, lived on Long Island during the Revolutionary War. She hung handkerchiefs and a black petticoat on her laundry line to signal the locations of hidden documents to other spies. Strong was part of the Culper Ring, which was the most important spy network during the war. Agent 355 was also supposedly a member of the Culper Ring. In 1776, one of Washington's first spies, Nathaniel Hale, was captured by the British while trying to return to his regiment. He was not a very good spy, but he was very brave. He was hanged the next day without trial. Following this, in 1778, Washington created the Culper Ring. The spy group was named after a place where Washington had done survey work, Culpeper County. The Culper Ring collected intel from British territories in New York. Washington set up the ring in such a way that even he didn't know the identities of his spies. Members of the Culper Ring were given numbers instead of using names. Washington himself was number 711. The Culper Ring was responsible for informing Washington about the British plans to counterfeit American money. As a result, Congress was able to recall the currency so it wouldn't be devalued. The Culper Ring also notified Washington of British plans to send troops from New York to Rhode Island to attack the French stationed there. They acted like loyalists to gain British trust. The Culper Ring was even responsible for discovering Benedict Arnold's planned treason. Supposedly, Agent 355 was the woman that discovered his actions. The Culper Code Book listed codes for 763 names, places, and things. For example, number 219 stood for gun, 223 meant gold, and 355 usually meant lady, but also may have referred to a specific agent. Major Benjamin Talmadge, who oversaw the operation and reported directly to Washington, called himself John Bolton and used number 721. Abraham Woodall went by Samuel Culpeper Sr. and used number 722. Abraham was recruited by Benjamin Talmadge. Robert Townsend, a partner in a coffee shop that the British liked to use, went by Samuel Culper Jr. and number 723. On August 15, 1779, Abraham Woodall wrote a letter to Washington, telling Washington that he was going to visit an anonymous woman, writing, "I intend to visit 727, New York, before long and think by the assistance of a 355 of my acquaintance, shall be able to outwit them all." It was later determined that Woodall met with a woman who was also in the Culper Ring. Some believe that she was Townsend's lover. In 1948, in the second volume of General Washington's Spies on Long Island and New York, Morton Pennypacker talks about Townsend's son lobbying in 1808 for a monument for those who died aboard the British prison ships. This was enough evidence to convince Pennypacker that 355 was Townsend's lover. In a November 1780 letter, Riddle wrote to Talmage about the imprisonment of one that hath been ever serviceable to this correspondence, which left him despondent. A 1948 newspaper article proclaimed, "Girl who spied for Washington died on Wallabout prison ship. Say child was born to her in hulk of vessel." This article certainly makes it sound like 355 was one woman who met with a tragic end. The same report said that the British captured Agent 355 toward the end of the war. She was moved to the prison ship Jersey on one of many prison ships floating in New York Harbor. Up to 11,000 people died on ships like this during the war. When 355 was captured, she was supposedly pregnant and she died after giving birth on the ship. However, there is only one reference to Agent 355 in the article, so it may not be true. In fact, one historian claimed that there were no women aboard the prison ships. John Burke, however, read through 14,000 names of people aboard the ships and noted that there were some women. When scholars looked into the story of a female agent who died aboard a prison ship, the earliest reference to her was in Morton Pennypacker's 1948 book. Using handwriting analysis, Pennypacker was able to identify some of the other members of Culper Ring, but he didn't offer much evidence for Agent 355 or who that may be. A 2009 article by John A. Burke and Andrea Meyer in New York Archives magazine said that the Culper report slowed down when British spymaster John Andre left New York in December 1779 for the siege of Charleston, and that the reports picked up again when he returned. This fact made Burke and Meyer believe that Agent 355 was pretending to be a friend of his to get information. There are some possible identities of Agent 355. The first possibility is that she was Anna Strong. A 2006 book written by Alexander Rode, Washington Spies, The Story of America's First Spy Ring, shows that Agent 355 would have had ties to the Culper Ring. Woodhull was her neighbor and a relative of her husband's. Her husband was a well-known patriot, and Strong may have posed as his wife because the British were less likely to suspect women of being spies. Pennypacker, however, does not believe that Strong was Agent 355. After her husband was set free, he and the children went to live in Connecticut while Anna stayed on Long Island so the British could not confiscate their land. Two other authors, Kilmeade and Yeager, don't believe Strong was Agent 355 either. They say that she had no ties to the British elite in Manhattan and that her husband's known patriotism would have made her a suspect. They later, however, agreed she was a possibility. It's also possible that Agent 355 was not an agent at all, but was instead an informant who met with Abraham Woodhull but never officially joined the spy ring. Agent 355 might also be Benedict Arnold's wife, Peggy Shippen Arnold. That could be how she was able to notify Washington of Arnold's treason. Agent 355 could be Betty Floyd, a cousin of Townsend's. Elizabeth Burgin was a widowed mother of three who took food to prisoners on the pontoons and was approached by George Higday, another agent, in 1779 to join Culper Ring. Soon after this, a letter from Washington to Talmage, which mentioned Higday, was intercepted by the British. Higday was promptly arrested. As a result, Higday's wife denounced Burgin, and a reward was offered for her arrest. Higday's wife hid for 2 weeks before moving to Connecticut, then to Philadelphia. That autumn, a truce was signed which allowed her to collect her children. However, she was left in poverty. Washington gave her a pension until at least 1787. Liss was a Townsend family slave. In 1778, the Townsend home was used as British headquarters. Historian Claire Bellajou discovered evidence that Liss may have been Agent 355. In her book, Remember Liss, the Remarkable True Story of One Woman's Enslavement and Freedom in New York, explained that Liss escaped and was later re-enslaved by the British. Close to the end of the war, she became pregnant and asked Robert Townsend for help so she could stay in New York. He took her into his home in Peck Clip, hired a white maid, and sent his last spy to Washington. In 1783, Liss gave birth to a boy named Harry. They were freed in 1803 when Liss was 40 years old. During her tenure as a British slave, she would have overheard the men's plans, and she tried to thwart them but wasn't believed because of her position in life. It's also possible that instead of being an agent, Agent 355 could have just been an occasional collaborator. Who was Agent 355? Was she a spy involved in the Culper Ring? Or maybe she was just a collaborator? What do you think? Leave a comment and let me know what you think. Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ready Mysterious. Join me next week for another captivating mystery.